Morning guys, I'm Dave Canterbury with Self-Reliance Outfitters in the Pathfinder School. And what I want to do this morning is I want to give you a walkthrough of the assembly of the new collaborative project notebook cover from Right in the Rain, Self-Reliance Outfitters, and Together Made. And this journal kit comes in a box when you buy it, and it's a kit that you assemble yourself so that you have a hand in creating an heirloom quality piece of kit. So we're going to walk through what comes in the box and then how to assemble this kit. Stay with me. Okay, when you receive your journal kit, it comes with virtually everything you need to assemble this journal so that you don't have to buy any tools. So let's open this thing up. We've got a nice set of instructions on Right in the Rain waterproof paper. We have a tin of saddle soap. We have a slickering device, which we'll talk about later. We have a wet form mold that we'll talk about later as well. And then we have some other components in here for the kit itself. We have all of the pieces that are already pre-cut and pre-punched for you so that you can assemble them. You have a Right in the Rain notebook. And then you have a variety of threads here, as well as 2 saddle stitching needles. And we'll talk more about that in a minute as well. And this notebook cover is designed for these outdoor all-weather spiral bound notebooks, but they will also fit the hardbound notebook as well. That's about the same size. And then in the bottom of the box, you have a nail that's there for the compass, which we can talk about later as well, and a piece of sandpaper for the slickering device. So let's start off by talking about how we go about assembling this kit and some of the pre-assembly things that we should do. And then we'll get into how we actually put this thing together. Now, I would first tell you before we start this project that the only things that don't come in this kit that you're going to need to get together for assembly is you're going to need a cigarette lighter, some type of pocket knife or a small pair of scissors to cut cordage with, and then something that you can use to hold a little bit of water and some type of rag. It can be just an old piece of t-shirt, shop rag you have laying around or whatever. And this is just a lid from a protein powder container that we're going to use for water. And we'll talk about why we're going to have that in just a second. Once you've assembled those things together and you've got the kit components out, we're ready to start our assembly process. All right, before we start to assemble this, we need to understand that we're going to end up finishing this leather by slickering or kind of wearing down the leather, rounding it over, and putting a coating on it of saddle soap mixed with water. And when we do that, we can do that once the thing is completely assembled to give it a more finished appearance. But in the beginning, we've got a couple pieces of this notebook that are going to end up being sewn down on top of the notebook like this, that you won't be able to get to these inside edges once it's assembled. So you've got 2 pieces like that. You've got this piece that's on one side here and one piece on this side here that will be sewn down, and you won't be able to get to these inner edges very well with your slickering. So what you can do with that is before you begin to assemble, take those 2 pieces and work on them really quick and get them kind of polished up. And all we're going to do with that is we're going to use our saddle soap, our water, and our rag to accomplish that. We don't need to use this slickering tool yet. We'll use that for more of the larger edges that are bound together by sewing them a little bit later. Okay, so we want to take, again, these edges that are going to be hidden a little bit later once we stitch things together. We want to just get our rag a little bit wet, rub some saddle soap on it, and then just take it and rub these edges really good that are going to be our more inside edges. And don't worry about being a little rough with this leather, because all that's going to do is give it a natural patina that we're going to add to it in a little while anyway, once we get the process done. So don't worry about being rough with this thing. And if you get a little bit of this on things, don't worry about that, because you're going to go back later anyway and cover this thing in saddle soap with a damp rag. So just get this part taken care of first, and it'll give you a better finished look in the end. Now, if you wanted to use the slickering tool for this, you've got some areas that are fairly small on here. But what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take this sandpaper and you're going to want to come in here and buff these edges down a little bit so that you don't have a rough, sharp edge there pulling up against the grain on the leather. And that's what this piece of sandpaper is for, is just to smooth that slickering device down a little bit. And then you can take some of that saddle soap and you can smear it into the edge of that slickering device and come in and go just like this. And again, this is not absolutely necessary right off the bat because you can do this part later. As long as you do this with a rag to begin with to get this worn down a little bit and slickered in and slicked up, and you'll see it gets kind of a shine to the leather where you don't have that raw edge on there. You've got more of a finished look. If you feel that thing catching on the grain of the leather a little bit, then you may need to get your sandpaper in there and sand it down a little bit, but it's going to wear down a little bit over time as well. So that's pretty good. That looks pretty good. We've got a nice rounded, polished, broken down and finished edge there that's got wax on it. So now we're ready to begin our assembly process. All right, before we begin any of our assembly, we need to understand the concept of the saddle stitch and how we need to thread these needles. So you've got 4 pieces of cordage here that are bound up, and you just kind of need to find the end of that cordage and unwind it. And this is a waxed cordage that's made in the USA. And you have 2 Osborne saddle stitching needles here. And what you're going to do with this is you are going to attach 1 needle to each end of this stitching cord. So kind of flatten it out with your thumb a little bit, just like that, and push it through the eye of the needle on one end of the string. Bring about 6 inches or so through. Then if you flatten it out a little bit, again with your thumb, you can bring that over the top of the needle and actually pass the needle through the cordage just like that. Bring it down and then draw it down tight, just like that. And that will keep that in place so that your cordage does not slip out through the eye every time you're pulling it through. And you're going to do that on both ends of the cord. So you've got that one on one end, and you're going to put a second one on the other end. And now you are ready to begin your saddle stitch, which means you're going both directions through the material. So you have 2 needles that you're working with. Instead of going one in, out like this, you're going both of them in, out at the same time to create a lock stitch. These needles are not real sharp. They do kind of require a pre-punched hole, which all of this material has holes pre-punched in it with a laser to make it easier for you to sew it. And because these aren't real sharp, you can actually kind of saddle stitch in the dark by shoving your needle through one side and then chasing the needle through the other side by just pushing it in to find your way and then pull them both out in opposite directions. That's one of the good things about a saddle stitch. All right, we have a couple pieces of this that we need to assemble prior to assembling the notebook itself. And the reason for that is that if we don't assemble this pocket before we sew the pocket down to the inside of our notebook, we won't be able to sew these divider portions. So we have to sew these divider portions before we sew the rest of it. So now we're going to start with the saddle stitching process. And what we're going to do is we're just going to line these 2 pieces up, and we're going to start 1, 2, 3, 4 holes back. And we're going to slide 1 needle in and come through the other side, just like this. And we're going to pull that through. Now what we're going to do is we're going to begin to alternate sides. And we're going to come through this side. And you can see I've got that needle in there, and now I can actually come in here and chase that needle so that I line up with the other side very easily. And I can then push those needles through just like this if I want to. And they are a little bit difficult to pull through because you do have thread attached to them that has been doubled over, remember that. And then I can pull the other side through. And what I want to do is I want to kind of snug that up a little bit to keep those stitches tight. You don't have to pull on it too hard, but you do want to keep them snug. And we're going to do the same thing on this all the way up to the top. And then we're going to back up and go back down the other way. And so generally as I get going on this, I don't chase my needles through. I pull the thread back like this and come in behind it. And that allows me to get right in there very easily. And I don't have two needles bound in there trying to pull my stitching through. What you want to avoid is you want to avoid your needles going through the other piece of thread. So you want to be careful of that and be cognizant of that when you're doing this. You don't want to be cutting your thread by penetrating it with the needle on the other side. That's another good reason to kind of come in here and draw that down and then be able to pull it off to one side or the other to get that second stitch in. Just like that. Now, once you've gone all the way up to the top, you're going to go back down. And the reason for that is because when you get down to the end, you're going to want to back up to lock the stitches in place and not have to tie any knots. And to get uniformity here, you'll have a double stitch here and a double stitch here. And we'll do the same thing when we get to the outside as well. As you're coming back through the second time, it's going to be a little bit more difficult sometimes to pull the thread through. Don't worry about that. Just yank it through there. Now I've gotten back to where I started. I'm just taking a look to make sure that all my stitches are nice and tight. And now I'm going to continue down here to this last hole, but I'm not going to stitch into the outer areas or the outer circumference. So now I'm just coming back through here. And again, going through one side. If I pull this back a little bit, it'll enable me to chase that hole very easily through. Just like this. Lock everything down. Okay, once we have stitched our way all the way to the bottom, now we're going to go back again 4 holes like we did here to give ourselves an even look. So we're just going to go right back through again, just like we did a minute ago, through the holes that we already have sewn up or stitched up. And we're going to go back 4 holes up and go 4 holes back and then sew to the end and 4 holes back and then stop. And now when you get to this point, what you're going to do is you're going to take a sharp knife or a pair of scissors and you're going to cut this down and just leave yourself very little tag whatsoever there. About a 1/16 is enough. Just like that. And then you're just going to come in here with your cigarette lighter, kind of rough that tag up enough to be able to see it. And it's waxed so it will melt. And then you can just press it down on there. And that will adhere it basically to the stitch behind it. And you'll have a nice even look right there. When we slicker this thing up and wax it up, it's going to look beautiful. Now we need to do the same thing here before we go any further, because this stitch and this stitch have to be done before we can assemble the pocket, which goes here. Okay? We'll get this done and then we'll get this portion done. Now, you've cut your thread and you've got a short side probably and a long side. So what I would do is I would just take and jerk the one side out. If you get a little bit of wax in your needle eye that makes it difficult to get another piece of thread through it, just melt that wax out real quick with your lighter and that'll take care of it. And then you can take the longest piece of string that you have and you can thread it the exact same way to finish this other side. All right, that takes care of our inside pocket. It's going to go here. And now that we have sewn these inner portions that would be hidden once we sew the pocket down, we can begin to now sew 3 layers of leather to sew this pocket down to the outside of our notebook in exactly the same fashion that we did this. Okay, so now we're ready to sew the pocket onto the notebook. And this pocket goes on the logoed side of the notebook, not the compass side. This pocket doesn't go here, it goes on this side, okay? So remember to put that pocket on the logoed, large logoed side. And you're going to start this out exactly the way you did before, where you're going to start 4 holes back, 1, 2, 3, 4. You're going to get all the leather lined up. And the first hole is generally the one that I find to be the biggest pain because you're trying to line everything up when you do that. Once you get through that hole, you're in pretty good shape. Pull half of your thread through, kind of pull your needles together and kind of pull everything so that you've got the same length of thread on both sides. And then just continue to sew this together exactly like you did the pocket. So you're going to go 4 up, 4 back, 4 holes up, 4 holes back, and then keep going all the way around, and then finish going 4 holes back. One of the things that I find the most appealing about this is that what Jeb's created here is he's created a way for you to take a project that you may want to dabble into, say leatherwork in this case, and provided you with everything you need to create a project that is an heirloom quality project that's good in any environment. I mean, it doesn't matter with a leather notebook cover if you have this thing in the woods or if you have this thing in the office. And you can do this wherever you want to do it. You can do this project at your kitchen table. You could do this in front of a fire, in camp. You could do this in your chair watching Monday Night Football, and it wouldn't matter. So it gives you a taste of something without having to spend a lot of money and invest in the tools it takes to cut the leather out, to get the stitching holes put in exactly straight and square with each other. And so you get a taste of something that you create yourself, and when you're done, you have something that you have pride in that is made in America, that has your hand in its creation as well. And I think that that is what Jeb has captured with Together Made, and that's why I'm so excited about this project. And I just think that with this project, you can get a taste of old school craftsmanship, basically in your own home, without investing a whole lot of money to get there, and walk away with something that is absolutely beautiful that will last you a lifetime. You know, one of the other really cool things about this is that there's no time limit on this. This is not something you've got to complete this in one sitting. You can work on this for a little while until your hands get tired of messing with it, or until you have something else you have to do, and then you can always come back to it down the road. You know, the next day, a few hours later, whatever you choose to do, you can always come back to it. So you're getting a taste of a skill. You're learning a skill in saddle stitching and working with leather. And at the same time, you're not rushed in the process to get the thing done. And again, when you're finished, you know, you've got something that's going to last you or whoever you give it to or make it for a lifetime. Okay, so now we're finished up with this pocket side. And you can see we went back 1, 2, 3, 4 holes here. 1, 2, 3, 4 holes here, 4 here, and 4 here. And that's the even look that I was talking about you're trying to achieve with this. And that's the reason for the back stitch at the beginning as well as at the end. So everything looks uniform. Okay, so now we have our first pocket completely sewn on, and we'll do some finish work on that here in a few minutes. Now we're going to get this flap sewn on here so that we have a completed notebook. So we're going to thread up our needles again, the same way we did before. Start 4 up, go 4 back. Everything just exactly the same, and get that sewn on. Okay, so now we've got the assembly process complete. Now we need to begin the process of finishing and then wet forming the piece. Okay, so before we get this thing all shined up, we want to do our slickering. And so let's get our sandpaper here, and these 2 edges right here are the ones that I find the most useful. So let's just kind of sand this down a little bit just to kind of get the roughness off of it. It's really nice that Jeb puts all of these small tools into these kits because it gives you the ability to do all this stuff without really purchasing anything. I mean, everybody's got a pocket knife around the house. Everybody's got a cigarette lighter. So it makes it real convenient to do these kits and to learn in the process. Okay, now we just need to get our water and our saddle soap. And the first thing I like to do is go along these edges and really just get them wet and get them soaked up. And I'm going to do one side at a time here. Saddle soap sticking to the rag there. Okay, once I've got that saturated really good, now I can come in here with the slickering tool and start to polish. What that's going to do is it's going to make that look like it's almost one piece of leather when you're done. Don't be afraid to get some of that saddle soap on your fingers and rub it in as you go. One thing you don't want to forget while you're doing this process is to get this pocket as well. So go ahead and get the edge now of this pocket. And again, you can go back to that smaller area of the slicker for that. This will give it that broken in, nice old look when you're done. So you're going to want to do this to all of your exterior edges all the way around this notebook to start off with. Get everything nice and wet and soaked up. The snap area, all of that. And this is the main reason that you did that inside portion first here, was because it's kind of hard to get to that with a slickering tool in these corners once you've got it sewn down. Again, don't be afraid to be rough on this thing. Don't be afraid to get rough with it. You're not going to hurt it any. It's a piece of leather. Get those edges worked in really good. Now, once you've got that done, it's time to move to the next step. Okay. Next thing we want to do is we want to give this thing a nice uniform look or appearance. So you can see these areas where we've gotten the leather wet and we've slickered the edges. Looks different than the rest of it. So we're going to go ahead and get wet here, get saddled up, and we're just going to start scrubbing this thing to get a nice uniform color. And we're going to do the entire notebook like this, or the entire cover, I should say. And then we're going to flip it over to the other side once we get this side where we want it. And we don't need to worry about the interior of this so much as far as the rough side of the leather goes. We're only trying to get these smooth areas like this. A little bit inside that snap's not going to hurt. And if you go in here a little bit, it ain't going to hurt anything, but you don't need to worry about getting it the same color as this because you're not going to achieve that very easily. It'll wear in over time and you're going to have that a notebook in there anyway. This part right here is the important part to get it nice and protected and shined up. It's not going to hurt anything just to rub the inside of this pocket lid. You're going to want that a little bit wet and damp anyway for the wet forming portion of it. So it doesn't hurt to get that soaked up now. And get inside a little bit here where it's turned over, just like that. This part right here is probably the most critical of giving you that finished look that you want in the end. Now, once you've done that and you've got this pretty well saturated, now you're going to do that wet forming that we talked about. And to accomplish that, you can use anything that you've got that is heavy at your house. It doesn't matter. But what you've got is you've got a piece of wood here that sits over top of that pocket just like this, so that you can actually close that thing down and put weight on top of it to give yourself a nice crisp corner right here. Make sure that you've got plenty of water and soap on this. And then just take something heavy. In this case, I'm going to use a log. And just drop it on top of that dude, just like that. and let it dry. Okay, once you are finished with that, you can place your Write in the Rain notebook on the inside, and you are ready to go with your leather-covered field journal. It's got a Pathfinder sun compass on the back side, and there is a nail included in your box that can actually be stored inside the smallest slot here. It's also made to store sail or saddle stitching needles in as well if you want to. And you'll have a beautiful heirloom quality notebook cover for your Write in the Rain notebook when you're finished. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this quick video on how to assemble this project. We only have a select number of these available at the current special Christmas price. I think it's $99.95 on our website. We started pre-sales on them yesterday. I don't know how many of them are left at that current price. I think we're only making 100 units at that price. But this will give you a step-by-step in how to assemble that kit once you receive it. And that was the purpose of this video. I appreciate your views. I appreciate your support. I thank you for everything you do for our school, for our family, and for our business, for all of our sponsors, instructors, affiliates, and friends. And I'll be back with another video as soon as I can. Thanks, guys.